I never intended to reveal that I was the mysterious majority investor behind Nexus Technologies. For 3 years, I'd been content watching my husband Martin rise through the ranks, carefully keeping my 51% ownership a secret, even from him. That all changed at the executive dinner when CFO Bradley Thompson dismissed me as just another trophy wife with no business acumen. As his words hung in the air, something inside me snapped. 24 hours later, the entire executive board was frantically calling my personal cell as their company stock plummeted. Sometimes revenge is best served with a corporate takeover. If you're watching this from a corner office somewhere, you might recognize this scenario. Corporate politics can be brutal, but family dynamics can be even more complicated. I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments and hit subscribe if you've ever been underestimated in your career or personal life. Trust me, what happened next in this boardroom showdown will make you think twice about judging someone by their appearance. My name is Jessica Reynolds, though most people at Nexus Technologies only knew me as Martin Blake's wife. What they didn't know was that long before I met Martin, I had already built and sold my first software company at the age of 28, walking away with a fortune that I had carefully invested and grown over the years. I met Martin at a tech conference in San Francisco 6 years ago. He was representing Nexus as a mid-level project manager, passionate about their new software platform. I was there purely out of professional curiosity, keeping tabs on industry developments after stepping back from the spotlight. What caught my attention wasn't just his knowledge of the product, but his genuine enthusiasm for the technology itself. Our conversation flowed naturally from API integration to favorite hiking trails in Northern California. He asked what I did, and I gave my standard vague answer about technology consulting. The relief in his eyes when I didn't immediately try to network my way into his company was palpable. Previous dating experiences had taught me that men often felt threatened by my success, so I'd grown accustomed to downplaying it in my personal life. We exchanged numbers, and for our first date, Martin suggested a small ramen shop in Oakland instead of the fancy restaurants my previous dates had chosen to impress me. I was charmed by his authenticity and lack of pretension. 3 months into our relationship, I realized I was falling in love with him. By then, I had done my due diligence on Nexus Technologies. The company had promising technology, but was struggling with capital and outdated management. Their stock price had been stagnating for years. I saw potential, both in the company and in Martin, who frequently shared innovative ideas that his superiors ignored. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. Through a series of shell companies and investment vehicles, I quietly began acquiring shares of Nexus. Over 18 months, I managed to secure 51% ownership, while keeping my identity completely anonymous. The financial world knew only that a mysterious investor identified as J.R. Reynolds had taken controlling interest, but chose to remain a silent partner. My plan was simple. I would watch from afar, intervening only if absolutely necessary. I wanted to see if the company could turn itself around with the right leadership. More importantly, I wanted to give Martin the chance to rise on his own merits, without my interference or financial advantage. As months turned into years, I watched Martin climb the corporate ladder. His dedication and natural talent for problem-solving earned him a series of promotions. I was proud of him, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. We bought a beautiful house in the suburbs, got married in a small ceremony, and settled into domestic life. But I began noticing subtle changes in Martin. The higher he rose at Nexus, the more he seemed to absorb the toxic corporate culture perpetuated by CEO Richard Callaway and his inner circle. Martin started working later, checking his phone constantly during dinner, and dropping names of executive team members in conversation. His language changed too, adopting the corporate jargon I'd always despised. "It's all about optics, Jess," he'd say, or "we need to leverage our synergies." The Martin I fell in love with would have rolled his eyes at such empty phrases. The real turning point came when Martin was invited to the annual executive dinner at Richard's mansion. These dinners were legendary at Nexus, essentially functioning as auditions for potential executives. Martin was ecstatic, interpreting the invitation as a sign he was being considered for the executive team. For 2 weeks leading up to the dinner, Martin obsessed over every detail. He bought a new suit, rehearsed potential conversation topics, and even practiced his handshake in the mirror. What concerned me most was how he repeatedly coached me on how to behave. "Don't talk about technology," he advised. "Richard's wife Elaine only cares about their foundation and interior design. Maybe don't mention your consulting work," he suggested another time. "Just say you're focusing on our home life for now." Each suggestion felt like another piece of myself I was expected to hide away. I tried to reason with him, reminding him that I had valuable insights about the industry, but he was adamant. "These people have certain expectations, Jess. I need them to see me as executive material, which means you need to fit in too." Against my better judgment, I agreed. After all, I had been hiding my true professional identity from him for years. What was one more night of pretending to be less than I was? The night before the dinner, I reviewed Nexus's latest quarterly report. Something in the financial statements caught my attention, a discrepancy in the R&D expenditure that didn't align with what Martin had mentioned about project funding. It was subtle, something most people would miss, but financial forensics had been my specialty before I developed my software company. I made a mental note to look into it further, but decided to focus on getting through the dinner first. Little did I know that my professional curiosity, combined with the events of the next evening, would force me to reveal secrets I had kept for years. Richard Calloway's mansion was exactly what you'd expect from a CEO trying too hard to project success. The sprawling Mediterranean-style home sat behind imposing gates in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, and a butler greeted guests at the door. Martin squeezed my hand as we approached the entrance. "Remember," he whispered, "just be agreeable and follow Elaine's lead." I nodded, already regretting my decision to play along. The butler took our coats and directed us to the main salon, where executives and their spouses were mingling. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter that seemed a touch too loud, a bit too forced. "Martin, my man," Richard Calloway boomed, clapping my husband on the shoulder. In his mid-50s, with artificially white teeth and a deep tan, Richard embodied every tech CEO stereotype. "So glad you could make it. And this must be Jessica." He gave me a quick once-over that made me feel like I was being appraised rather than greeted. "Pleasure to meet you," I said, extending my hand professionally. "Charming," Richard replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Elaine is over by the fireplace with the other ladies. I'm sure you'll find plenty to chat about." And just like that, I was dismissed. Martin gave me an encouraging nod as Richard pulled him into a conversation with CFO Bradley Thompson, a thin man with cold eyes and a permanent smirk, and COO Greg Mitchell, whose booming voice carried across the room. I made my way to the cluster of women by the fireplace. Elaine Calloway, a perfectly coiffed blonde in her 40s, was holding court. Beside her stood Stephanie Thompson, Bradley's wife, looking uncomfortable in her designer dress, and Diane Mitchell, who seemed bored as she sipped her wine. "Jessica, welcome," Elaine said with practiced warmth. "Martin has been such an asset to Nexus. Richard speaks very highly of him." "Thank you," I replied. "Martin loves his work at the company." "How lovely. Do you work, dear?" The question was loaded, and I could feel the other women watching for my response. "I do some technology consulting," I said, deciding to stick at least partially to the truth. "How interesting," Elaine said in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "I used to be in marketing before Richard and I started our family. Now I focus on our foundation and our homes." She emphasized the plural. The conversation quickly turned to interior designers, private schools, and the challenges of finding reliable household staff. I nodded and smiled, offering occasional comments while observing the dynamics between the women. Stephanie Thompson barely spoke, flinching whenever her husband's loud laugh echoed from across the room. Diane seemed to be on her third glass of wine already. Karen Fisher, wife of VP of Sales Robert Fisher, kept checking her phone discreetly. As dinner was announced, I was surprised to see the seating arrangement separated spouses. Martin was placed between Richard and Bradley at one end of the table, while I was seated between Stephanie and Diane at the opposite end. The message was clear. The men would discuss business while the women made small talk. Halfway through the main course, after the women had exhausted discussions about vacation homes and charity galas, Stephanie leaned over to me. "How are you finding it?" she asked quietly. "Being a Nexus wife?" Something in her tone made me pay attention. "It's an adjustment," I answered carefully. She nodded. "They don't tell you what it's really like when you marry in. The constant pressure, the politics, the boys' club," Diane added, lowering her voice. "Greg comes home and repeats the awful things they say about female employees. When I call him out, he says it's just locker room talk." "Bradley refers to the women in accounting as the girls," Stephanie confided. "The youngest is 42. Karen joined in. Robert fired his assistant because she got pregnant, claimed she wasn't committed to the job anymore." I felt a chill. These weren't just isolated incidents, but indications of a deeply problematic company culture. "Does HR know about this?" I asked. The three women exchanged knowing looks. "HR reports directly to Richard," Karen explained. "And Richard believes women belong in supportive roles, not leadership." Elaine finished, suddenly joining our conversation. Her smile remained, but her eyes had hardened. "That's just how business works at this level, dear. Best to accept it." Before I could respond, Richard stood and tapped his glass for attention. "Gentlemen," he began, pointedly ignoring the women at the table, "a toast to the men who make Nexus Technologies great, to innovation, to profit, and to the brotherhood that drives our success." The male executives raised their glasses enthusiastically. Martin caught my eye from across the table, beaming with pride at being included in this brotherhood. As the dinner progressed, the conversation turned to Nexus's newest software platform, something I knew intimately from my research as a major shareholder. When Robert Fisher made a comment about user interface challenges, I couldn't help myself. "Have you considered implementing adaptive interface protocols? They could address the scalability issues without compromising user experience." The table fell silent. Richard looked at me like I'd started speaking in tongues. "The UX team has been exploring several approaches," Martin quickly interjected, shooting me a warning glance. Bradley Thompson chuckled. "Let's leave the business talk to those who understand it, sweetheart. I'm sure you read something about interfaces in a magazine, but this is complex technology." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "Actually, I was referring to the recent developments in AI-driven adaptive interfaces that could specifically address the latency issues mentioned in your last quarterly report." "She's just another trophy wife with no business acumen," Bradley announced to the table. "Martin, control your woman. This is why we don't usually discuss business at these dinners." The other executives laughed uncomfortably. Martin looked mortified but said nothing in my defense. Richard cleared his throat. "Perhaps the ladies should retire to the solarium for dessert? I believe Elaine has planned a lovely assortment of pastries." "Yes," Elaine agreed quickly. "And Jessica, maybe you could tell us about your charity interests. Women should stick to planning charity events and leave the technology to the experts, don't you think?" The condescension in her voice made my blood boil, but what hurt most was Martin's silence. The man who had once loved my mind now sat embarrassed by it, eager for me to leave the room so he could continue bonding with the brotherhood. As we women filed out, I caught Stephanie's sympathetic glance. The solarium dessert experience was mercifully brief, with minimal conversation. When it was time to leave, Martin found me and guided me quickly to our car, his hand firm on my lower back. The drive home was silent for the first 10 minutes. Finally, Martin spoke. "You promised you wouldn't do that." "Do what? Express an informed opinion?" "You embarrassed me, Jess. I told you how important this dinner was." "I was embarrassed when my husband sat there while his colleague called me a trophy wife." Martin sighed heavily. "You don't understand how these things work. Bradley is CFO. His opinion matters. And mine doesn't? Not in that room, not tonight. Tonight was about me showing that I fit in, that I could be one of them." "One of them?" I repeated. "The men who dismiss women professionals and make sexist comments? You're blowing this out of proportion. It's just corporate culture. It's toxic, Martin, and you're changing because of it." He gripped the steering wheel tighter. Richard pulled me aside before we left. He said they're considering me for the VP of Operations position. Do you understand what that means? It's everything I've been working for. At what cost? I asked quietly. He didn't answer. When we arrived home, Martin immediately headed upstairs, muttering about needing to prepare for an early meeting. I heard him fall asleep within 20 minutes. I, however, went to my home office and locked the door. If Martin was willing to sacrifice his integrity for Nexus, I needed to know exactly what kind of company he was selling his soul to. I opened my laptop and began making calls to people who owed me favors. By morning, I would have the ammunition I needed to make a decision that would change everything. As Martin slept upstairs, I sat in my home office, surrounded by financial reports, SEC filings, and internal documents I had access to as the majority shareholder of Nexus Technologies. Few people knew that before my software success, I had specialized in financial forensics at one of the Big Four accounting firms. Those skills had never left me, and now I was putting them to use. My journey to becoming J.R. Reynolds, the mysterious investor behind Nexus, began shortly after I sold my first company, SecurePath Solutions. I had developed an encryption algorithm that revolutionized secure financial transactions, and when a tech giant offered $220 million for my startup, I took the deal. After taxes and paying out my investors, I walked away with just over $75 million at age 28. I had grown up watching my parents struggle financially, my mother working 2 jobs after my father abandoned us. That experience instilled in me both a drive to succeed and a deep fear of financial vulnerability. When I suddenly had more money than I could spend in a lifetime, I approached it with caution and strategic planning. Working with a team of financial advisors and attorneys, I created a complex investment structure that protected my privacy and maximized returns. J.R. Reynolds became my business alter ego, a shield between my personal life and my financial empire. It allowed me to move through the world as Jessica, without the weight of wealth changing how people treated me. When I met Martin, I was in a phase of my life where I craved normalcy and genuine connection. Previous relationships had faltered when men discovered my wealth, either becoming intimidated or viewing me as a meal ticket. Martin was refreshingly different, passionate about technology for its own sake rather than its profit potential. I made a calculated decision to keep my financial status private, telling myself it was temporary, just until our relationship solidified. But as months passed and we grew closer, the right moment to reveal my secret never seemed to arrive. The longer I waited, the harder it became to explain why I had kept such a significant part of myself hidden. After we married, I justified my continued secrecy by telling myself I was protecting Martin's pride and independence. But in my most honest moments, I knew I was also protecting myself from potential disappointment. What if, like others, he changed once he knew? My investment in Nexus had been another calculated risk. The company had solid technology, but flawed leadership and insufficient capital. Through a series of carefully structured transactions, I had quietly accumulated shares until I secured the 51% that made me the majority owner. The board knew only that J.R. Reynolds had taken controlling interest, but chose to remain a silent partner who voted by proxy on major decisions. My original plan had been simple: stay behind the scenes, let the company operate independently, and intervene only if absolutely necessary. For 3 years, that approach had worked. Until tonight. Now, as I reviewed the financial statements more carefully, I saw what had initially caught my attention. CFO Bradley Thompson had been systematically manipulating the R&D expenditure reports, likely to inflate the company's innovation metrics while diverting funds elsewhere. The discrepancies were subtle but unmistakable to a trained eye. I picked up my phone and called Eleanor Walsh, my attorney since the SecurePath days. "Jessica," she answered, despite the early hour. "This must be important. I need to become J.R. Reynolds publicly," I said without preamble. There was a long pause. "Are you sure? We've worked very hard to keep your identities separate." "I'm sure. I need to take active control of Nexus Technologies. This is about Martin, isn't it? Eleanor knew most of my secrets. Partly, I admitted. But it's also about the company itself. There's financial misconduct, Eleanor, and a culture of discrimination that's being deliberately fostered by leadership. You understand what this means, she said. Once you reveal yourself as J.R. Reynolds, there's no going back. Your privacy, your marriage, everything changes. I know. And you're prepared to deal with the consequences? Personal and professional? I thought about Martin upstairs, about his silence during the dinner, about the man I fell in love with who seemed to be disappearing into Nexus's toxic culture. They need to learn a lesson they'll never forget, I said firmly. Eleanor sighed. I'll prepare the necessary documentation. But Jessica? Be careful. Men like Richard Calloway and Bradley Thompson don't take humiliation well. After ending the call, I spent the next several hours gathering intelligence. I accessed confidential personnel records, reviewed performance evaluations, and examined the pattern of promotions and terminations over the past 5 years. The picture that emerged confirmed what Stephanie and the other wives had suggested: systemic discrimination against female employees and a toxic boys' club mentality. More disturbing were the financial irregularities I uncovered. Bradley had created elaborate smokescreens to hide the fact that executive bonuses were being calculated based on artificially inflated performance metrics. The deception wasn't just unethical, it potentially crossed into illegal territory. By 6 a.m., I had compiled a comprehensive dossier on each executive, documenting their misconduct and complicity in creating a hostile work environment. I also had solid evidence of financial mismanagement that would interest both the board and possibly the SEC. Martin's alarm went off upstairs. I heard him moving around, getting ready for work. He came downstairs, poured coffee into his travel mug, and paused at my office door. I have an early meeting, he said stiffly. We'll talk tonight. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. After he left, I showered and dressed in my power outfit, a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, and comfortable but expensive heels. This was the real Jessica Reynolds, not the demure corporate wife I had pretended to be last night. At 8 a.m., I called the Nexus board secretary, a woman named Patricia Collins. Miss Collins, I said when she answered, I need you to schedule an emergency board meeting for 11 a.m. today. I'm sorry, but who is calling? She asked, clearly confused. This is J.R. Reynolds, majority shareholder of Nexus Technologies. There was a startled pause. Mr. Reynolds? We've never spoken directly before. Miss Reynolds, I corrected. And yes, that's about to change. Please notify all board members and the executive team that attendance is mandatory. The meeting will take place in the main boardroom. On what authority are you calling this meeting? She asked, regaining her professional composure. On the authority of the person who owns 51% of the company. I'll be sending documentation to confirm my identity shortly. After ending the call, I contacted 3 trusted advisors from my Secure Path days, asking them to meet me at Nexus headquarters. Then I emailed official notice of the emergency meeting to the board, attaching legal documentation confirming my identity and ownership stake. My phone immediately began buzzing with calls and messages, but I ignored them all. Instead, I gathered my files, got into my car, and drove to the Nexus Technologies headquarters, ready to reveal the truth I had hidden for 3 years. Let me pause here for a moment and ask, have you ever kept a secret because you thought you were protecting someone you love? I've learned that even with the best intentions, secrets have a way of creating more problems than they solve. If this resonates with you, drop a like on this video. Your support means so much as I share the most challenging chapter of my story. Now, back to what happened when I walked into that boardroom. The Nexus Technologies headquarters occupied a gleaming high-rise in the business district, its logo prominently displayed in the lobby. As I walked through the revolving doors, I felt a strange sense of ownership. This building, these people, this company, I had been invisibly connected to all of it for years. The security guard at the front desk looked up as I approached. Good morning, ma'am. Can I help you? Jessica Reynolds for the board meeting. He checked his screen and frowned. I don't see you on the list for today's emergency meeting. I called the meeting, I replied calmly. I'm J.R. Reynolds. His eyes widened slightly. One moment, please. He made a quick call, speaking in hushed tones while occasionally glancing at me. After a moment, he hung up and printed a visitor badge. Miss Collins will meet you at the executive elevator, he said, a new note of respect in his voice. Patricia Collins was waiting for me, as promised, her professional demeanor barely concealing her curiosity. Miss Reynolds, she greeted me. This is unexpected. I imagined so, I replied as we stepped into the elevator. Has everyone arrived? The executive team and available board members are gathering now. There's considerable confusion about the purpose of this meeting. That will be clarified shortly. As the elevator ascended, Patricia studied me. If you don't mind my asking, how long have you been J.R. Reynolds? Since the beginning, I answered. I've always been J.R. Reynolds. The elevator doors opened directly into the executive floor. Through glass walls, I could see people assembling in the boardroom, their body language tense. Martin was there, looking confused as he checked his phone repeatedly, probably trying to reach me. My team of advisors had already arrived. Eleanor Walsh, my attorney, David Chen, my financial advisor, and Samantha Rodriguez, my former COO from SecurePath. They stood together at one end of the room, professional and composed amid the growing chaos. Ready? Eleanor asked as I approached. As I'll ever be, I replied. We entered the boardroom together. Conversation immediately halted as all eyes turned to us. Richard Calloway stood at the head of the table, his face flushed with irritation. What is the meaning of this? He demanded. Who called this meeting? We have real work to do. I called it, I said, stepping forward. I'm J.R. Reynolds. There was a moment of stunned silence before Bradley Thompson broke into laughter. You? He scoffed. Martin's wife? This is ridiculous. Martin stared at me, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and dawning realization. Jessica? He said quietly. What are you talking about? I nodded to Eleanor, who distributed folders to everyone at the table. Inside, you'll find legal documentation confirming that I am indeed J.R. Reynolds, majority shareholder of Nexus Technologies, controlling 51% of outstanding shares. You'll also find my Harvard MBA credentials, my background as founder and CEO of SecurePath Solutions, and the details of my professional experience. As they flipped through the documents, the color drained from Richard's face. Bradley stared at the papers in disbelief. Martin looked like he'd been struck. This is some kind of joke, Bradley insisted, though his voice had lost its confidence. I assure you, it's not, Eleanor responded. Miss Reynolds has been the controlling shareholder of this company for 3 years. Until now, she chose to remain a silent partner. Why the sudden change? Richard asked, attempting to regain control of the situation. Excellent question, I replied, moving to the head of the table, effectively displacing him from his power position. Last night's dinner was quite educational about how this company is run. I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's projection system. Let's start with some financial discrepancies I've identified. For the next 20 minutes, I methodically outlined the irregularities in Bradley's financial reporting, showing clear evidence of how performance metrics had been manipulated to increase executive bonuses while misrepresenting the company's actual status to shareholders. Bradley's face grew increasingly pale. These are complex financial matters that a software engineer wouldn't understand. I was a financial forensic specialist before founding SecurePath, I informed him, and I understand perfectly how you've been cooking the books. Next, I presented data on the company's hiring, promotion, and termination patterns, demonstrating the systematic discrimination against women and minorities. This isn't just morally reprehensible, I continued. It's legally actionable and presents significant liability for the company. Richard finally found his voice. You've been spying on your own company? For what purpose? Not spying, observing. I had hoped the leadership team could correct course without intervention. Last night proved that hope was misplaced. Martin, Richard appealed to my husband. Did you know about this? Have you been feeding her information? All eyes turned to Martin, who looked shell-shocked. I had no idea, he said quietly, his eyes fixed on me. None at all. Which brings us to the next order of business, I continued. Effective immediately, I'm ordering a full independent audit of all financial records and an external review of HR practices. You can't do that, Bradley protested. Actually, as majority shareholder, I can, and I am. The board won't stand for this, Richard insisted. The board serves at the pleasure of the shareholders, Eleanor reminded him, and Miss Reynolds controls 51% of the votes. I turned to the 3 non-executive board members present. I understand this is sudden, but I trust you recognize your fiduciary responsibility to address these serious concerns. The board members, already reviewing the evidence I'd provided, nodded gravely. They understood the legal implications of ignoring such allegations. Furthermore, I continued, pending the audit results, I'm placing CFO Bradley Thompson on administrative leave. Bradley jumped to his feet. This is outrageous. You can't just walk in here and— I can and I am, I interrupted calmly. My team has already secured the necessary court orders to prevent any destruction of evidence. I nodded to Samantha, who confirmed with a slight nod. Bradley's face contorted with rage. You've been lying to everyone, including your husband. You're in no position to take the moral high ground. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Martin, who had remained unnaturally still throughout the presentation. His face was unreadable as he looked from me to Richard to Bradley. Is that really your defense, Bradley? I asked quietly. To deflect from financial fraud by pointing out I kept my identity private? Yes, I chose not to disclose that I was J.R. Reynolds. That was a personal decision that hurt no one. You chose to manipulate financial reports for personal gain, potentially harming every employee and shareholder of this company. I turned to address the entire room. Yesterday, I was a nobody to all of you. Today, I'm your boss. Tomorrow? That depends on what the audit reveals. For those who have nothing to hide, there's nothing to fear. For others, I let the implication hang in the air. Richard made one last attempt to salvage the situation. Jessica, Miss Reynolds, surely we can discuss this privately. There's no need for such drastic measures. There's every need, I replied firmly. The culture at Nexus has become toxic under your leadership, Richard. The financial misconduct is just a symptom of a larger problem. I turned to the board members. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in the current CEO. As the ramifications of what I was proposing sank in, the room erupted into chaos. Richard shouted about loyalty and betrayal. Bradley began frantically texting, presumably to his lawyers. Several executives started arguing amongst themselves. Through it all, Martin remained silent, his eyes never leaving my face. I couldn't read his expression. Shock, hurt, anger, perhaps all 3. But I knew with certainty that our relationship would never be the same after today. This meeting will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m., I announced over the din. By then, I expect full cooperation with the audit team. Anyone who fails to comply will be terminated immediately. With that, I gathered my materials and walked out, my team following close behind. As the boardroom door closed, I heard the chaos continue, but I didn't look back. For 3 years, I had hidden in the shadows of Nexus Technologies. Now it was time to step into the light, whatever the personal cost might be. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt interminable. Once safely inside my car in the parking garage, I finally allowed myself to exhale. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the steering wheel, the adrenaline of the confrontation beginning to ebb. Jessica, Martin's voice startled me. He had followed me to the garage and now stood beside my car, his face a storm of emotions. I rolled down the window, bracing myself for whatever was coming. Were you ever going to tell me? He demanded. Or was I just another one of your investments to manage? The accusations stung. That's not fair, Martin. Fair? You want to talk about fair? His voice rose. You've been lying to me our entire relationship. You watched me struggle and climb the corporate ladder when you owned the damn company. I didn't own it when we met, I said quietly. I acquired controlling interest after we were together. And that makes it better? You still kept it from me for years. He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. Do you have any idea how this makes me look? Everyone up there thinks I was in on it. I'm sorry for how this affects your professional reputation, I said. But I couldn't sit by any longer while Nexus was mismanaged by men who dismiss women as trophy wives. This isn't about that dinner, Martin said, his voice lowering. This is about you not trusting me with who you really are. Did you think I couldn't handle it? That I was too weak or insecure? The truth was complicated. At first, I wanted you to know me for me, not my money. Then, I worried you might feel overshadowed. And the longer I waited, the harder it became to tell you. Well, congratulations. Now everyone knows. His tone was bitter. I need some time to process this. I'll be staying with Jake for a few days. Before I could respond, he turned and walked away. I watched him go, a hollow feeling settling in my chest. For all my strategic planning in the business world, I had completely mismanaged the most important relationship in my life. I drove home in a daze, barely noticing the route I took. The house felt eerily quiet when I arrived, Martin's absence already palpable. I changed out of my business attire into comfortable clothes and tried to gather my thoughts. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since I left Nexus headquarters. Calls from board members, executives, my financial team, and business reporters who had somehow already caught wind that something significant was happening at Nexus. I ignored them all and called Eleanor instead. It's begun, she said without preamble. The stock is down 12% already as rumors spread. Bradley's attorney has contacted me, threatening everything from defamation to corporate espionage. Let them threaten, I replied. We have the evidence. And Martin? I swallowed hard. He's staying with a friend for a few days. He's understandably upset. Give him time, Eleanor advised. This is a lot to process. Over the next few hours, news of the Nexus upheaval began to spread through business circles. By evening, the first articles appeared online. Mystery investor revealed. Tech entrepreneur takes control of Nexus, and Nexus Technologies faces leadership crisis amid fraud allegations. I ordered takeout but couldn't eat. The house felt too empty, too silent. Martin and I had built a life here together, and now I wasn't sure what remained of it. The next morning brought a fresh wave of chaos. The Nexus stock had fallen 18% overnight as market uncertainty grew. My inbox was flooded with messages from employees, shareholders, and media outlets. Bradley Thompson had given a hastily arranged interview, claiming he was being framed by a vindictive outsider with no understanding of the company's operations. I drove back to Nexus headquarters, this time walking through the front doors, not as Martin's wife, but as the majority owner. The atmosphere had changed completely. Employees whispered as I passed, some looking fearful, others curious or even hopeful. The executive floor was in disarray. Richard Calloway's assistant was clearing out his office, tears streaming down her face. He resigned this morning, Patricia Collins informed me. Said he wouldn't work under these conditions. I nodded, not entirely surprised. Richard's ego wouldn't allow him to publicly submit to my authority after years of dismissing women in the workplace. My team had set up in a conference room, coordinating with the external auditors who had arrived early that morning. Samantha gave me a quick update. Bradley tried to access the financial servers last night, but IT security blocked him per our instructions. He's threatening legal action. Let him, I replied. We have the digital footprint of his attempt to delete evidence after being placed on leave. Throughout the day, I met with department heads and key personnel, assuring them that, despite the leadership changes, most jobs were secure. Many seemed relieved, particularly the women in middle management who had been passed over for promotion multiple times. One of them, Janet Alvarez from the product development team, pulled me aside after a meeting. I just wanted to say thank you, she said quietly. Things have been difficult here for women. Maybe now that will change. Her words reminded me of why I had taken this drastic step. Whatever the personal cost, the toxic culture at Nexus needed to be addressed. By mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Martin. Watching the news. Hope you know what you're doing. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't entirely cold either. I took it as a small positive sign and responded, I do. We should talk when you're ready. No reply came. The following days passed in a blur of meetings, interviews with the audit team, and strategic planning sessions. The initial stock drop stabilized as I released a statement outlining a transition plan and my commitment to Nexus's core technologies. Some investors even seemed relieved that the mysterious J.R. Reynolds had finally taken a visible role in company leadership. Martin remained at his friend's house, our communication limited to brief, practical texts. The silence between us grew heavier with each passing day. A week after the boardroom confrontation, I received an unexpected visitor at the office. Stephanie Thompson, Bradley's wife, requested to speak with me privately. She looked different than she had at the dinner, more confident, her posture straighter. "I wanted you to have these," she said, placing a USB drive on my desk. Financial records Bradley kept on a home computer. "He doesn't know I found them." I studied her carefully. "This could be difficult for you if he finds out." "I've filed for divorce," she said simply. 20 years I spent playing the supportive wife while he belittled me and cheated on me. When I saw you stand up to all of them, I realized I could stand up too. After she left, I gave the drive to the audit team. It contained damning evidence of Bradley's financial misconduct going back years, including communications with Richard about hiding expenses and inflating metrics. The other executive wives reached out in their own ways. Diane Mitchell sent a brief email expressing her support. Karen Fisher called to share information about discriminatory practices in the sales department. Even Elaine Calloway, after initially defending Richard publicly, contacted me through her attorney to distance herself from his actions. These women, who had seemed so complicit in the toxic culture during the dinner, were revealing themselves to be keen observers who had been playing the roles expected of them, just as I had. Meanwhile, the audit progressed, uncovering more extensive problems than I had initially suspected. The financial mismanagement went beyond executive bonuses to include questionable vendor contracts and potential kickback schemes. The HR investigation revealed systematic discrimination in hiring and promotion, with qualified female candidates consistently passed over in favor of less experienced men. As the evidence mounted, I found myself facing a company in greater disarray than I had anticipated. The culture problems ran deep, embedded in policies and practices established over years. Fixing Nexus would require more than removing a few bad actors. It would need comprehensive restructuring. Through it all, I kept hoping Martin would reach out, that we could begin to repair what had broken between us. But as days turned into weeks with minimal communication, I started to accept that our marriage might be another casualty of the secrets I had kept. 3 weeks after the boardroom confrontation, I arrived home late to find Martin's car in the driveway. My heart raced as I entered the house, unsure what to expect. He sat at our kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and several days' stubble on his chin. "Hi," I said softly, setting down my bag. "Hi." His voice was neutral, giving nothing away. I sat across from him, the familiar table between us now feeling like a vast divide. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence filled with all the words we hadn't said these past weeks. "I've been staying at Jake's," he finally said, trying to make sense of everything. "I know. How are you doing?" He gave a humorless laugh. "How am I doing? My wife turned out to be a secret millionaire who owns the company I work for. I'm the laughingstock of the entire tech industry. Former colleagues won't return my calls because they think I was complicit. So I'm doing just great, Jessica. Or should I call you J.R.?" The bitterness in his voice cut deep, but I couldn't blame him. "I'm still Jessica," I said quietly. "J.R. Reynolds is just a name on legal documents. But it's not just a name, is it? It's a whole identity you kept hidden from me for years." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "Why? I keep asking myself why you couldn't trust me with this." I took a deep breath, knowing I owed him complete honesty now. At first, it was self-protection. Before you, I dated men who either resented my success or saw me as their meal ticket. When we met, the connection felt so genuine. I was afraid that would change if you knew about my wealth. "You thought I was that shallow?" "No," I said quickly. "But I've seen money change relationships in ways people don't expect. Then as time passed and we got more serious, I worried about your pride. You were so passionate about making your own way in the world. So you decided to lie to protect my fragile male ego? The sarcasm in his tone was unmistakable. That's not fair, I protested. You were always talking about proving yourself, about earning success through hard work rather than connections. I was trying to respect that. Martin ran his hands through his hair in frustration. By secretly bankrolling the company I was working so hard to succeed in, do you have any idea how that makes me feel? Like everything I achieved might not have been earned. Your promotions were legitimate, I assured him. I never interfered with day-to-day operations or personnel decisions. But you could have. That's the point. He stood up and paced the kitchen. And what about our life together? This house, our vacations, everything. Was it all your money? I hesitated, which was answer enough. God, Jessica, he groaned. I thought we were building something together, as equals. But you were just… what? Humoring me? Letting me think I was contributing? It wasn't like that, I insisted. Our life together is real. My feelings for you are real, but the foundation was a lie. He stopped pacing and leaned against the counter, suddenly looking exhausted. And then there's what happened at Nexus. You could have told me about your concerns privately. Instead, you ambushed me in that boardroom along with everyone else. After that dinner, after seeing how they treated women and how you stood by silently, I couldn't wait any longer, I explained. The financial misconduct needed immediate attention. I understand taking action against Bradley and Richard. What I don't understand is why you had to humiliate me in the process. His words hit me hard. In my determination to address the problems at Nexus, I hadn't fully considered how the public revelation would affect Martin personally and professionally. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. I was angry after the dinner, and I acted impulsively. I should have warned you privately first. Martin sighed and sat back down. The thing is, Jessica, I get why you were angry. Those guys were out of line at the dinner, and I should have said something. I was so focused on impressing them that I lost sight of what matters. His admission surprised me. Really? Yeah? Staying at Jake's, having time to think. I realized I've been changing, and not for the better. The corporate ladder became so important that I was willing to let my wife be disrespected just to climb another rung. He shook his head. I don't like who I was becoming. A small flicker of hope ignited inside me. So where does that leave us? Honestly, I don't know. Martin looked at me directly. I love you, Jessica. That hasn't changed. But trust has been broken on both sides. I couldn't stand up for you, and you couldn't trust me with your truth. Can we fix this? I asked, vulnerability creeping into my voice. Maybe, but it won't be easy or quick. He reached across the table, not quite touching my hand, but closing some of the distance between us. I think we need professional help. Marriage counseling. I nodded quickly. Yes, I'd like that. And professionally, he continued, I can't keep working at Nexus. Not after everything that's happened. I understand, I said, though the thought of him leaving the company created another complication. What will you do? I've been thinking about that. I've always had ideas that got shut down at Nexus, approaches that weren't how things are done. Maybe it's time I tried building something myself, something small but meaningful. For the first time in our conversation, I saw a glimmer of the passionate, innovative Martin I had fallen in love with. That sounds perfect for you. No investment from you, he added firmly. If I do this, it has to be on my own. Agreed, I said immediately. Your business, your way. We talked for hours that night, more honestly than we had in years. The anger and hurt weren't magically resolved, but we had taken the first step toward understanding each other again. As we were about to head upstairs, exhausted from the emotional conversation, my phone rang. It was Eleanor. Jessica, I'm sorry to call so late, but you need to know this immediately. The audit team has uncovered evidence of serious financial fraud, far beyond what we initially suspected. Bradley has apparently been siphoning company funds through shell corporations for years. Has he been notified? I asked, instantly switching to crisis management mode. That's just it, Eleanor replied, concern evident in her voice. When the team tried to contact him for questioning, They discovered he's booked a flight to a non-extradition country, leaving tomorrow morning. We've notified the authorities, but I thought you should know right away. Thank you, Eleanor. Keep me updated. I hung up and turned to Martin, who had heard enough to understand the situation. Go, he said simply. We'll continue this conversation later. As I gathered my things to head back to the office and deal with this new crisis, Martin added. And Jessica? Be careful. Bradley always struck me as a man who wouldn't go down without a fight. His concern touched me. Whatever our personal issues, at least we still cared about each other's well-being. It was something to build on, a foundation that might be damaged but wasn't destroyed. 1 month after the boardroom confrontation that changed everything, I stood in front of Nexus Technologies employees in the company auditorium. The room was packed, with additional staff joining via video conference from our satellite offices around the country. Today marks a new beginning for Nexus, I announced. The audit is complete, the leadership transition is underway, and it's time to share our vision for the future. The past month had been the most challenging of my professional life. Bradley Thompson had indeed attempted to flee the country, but was detained by federal authorities at the airport. He now faced multiple charges of financial fraud, embezzlement, and securities violations. Richard Calloway had resigned in disgrace when the extent of his knowledge about Bradley's activities became clear. Several other executives had either resigned or been terminated as the full scope of the misconduct was revealed. In their place, I had appointed an interim executive team composed of experienced professionals from outside the company and promising internal talents who had been previously overlooked. Samantha Rodriguez, my former COO from SecurePath, had agreed to serve as interim CEO while I focused on my role as chairwoman of the board. Our first priority is restoring trust, I continued, addressing the assembled employees. Trust with our customers, our shareholders, and most importantly, with all of you. The toxic culture that permeated this company ends today. I outlined the comprehensive changes being implemented: transparent financial reporting, merit-based promotion systems, new harassment and discrimination policies with actual enforcement mechanisms, flexible work arrangements, and improved parental leave benefits for all employees. Nexus has always had brilliant people and innovative technology, I said. Now we'll have a culture and leadership worthy of your talents. The response was cautiously optimistic. Years of broken promises and corporate doublespeak had made many employees skeptical, but there was also a palpable sense of hope in the room. After the all-hands meeting, I met with the newly formed Women in Tech Alliance, an employee resource group that had sprung up organically in the wake of the leadership changes. Their leader, Janet Alvarez from Product Development, had emerged as a powerful voice for positive change. The new policies are a good start, Janet said during our meeting. But the real test will be whether they're actually enforced. I agree completely, I told her. That's why we've established the Independent Ethics Committee reporting directly to the board, and why I'd like your group to have representation on that committee. Over the following weeks, the company underwent a remarkable transformation. With the toxic leadership removed, talented employees at all levels began to flourish. Ideas that had previously been dismissed were now given serious consideration. Teams became more collaborative and innovative without the constant fear of ridicule or retribution from above. The market responded positively to the changes. After the initial stock price drop, Nexus shares had stabilized and begun a steady climb as investors recognized that the company was addressing its problems head-on and emerging stronger. Industry analysts who had initially predicted doom now spoke of Nexus as a potential model for corporate reform. One unexpected source of support came from the former executive wives. Stephanie Thompson, now in divorce proceedings from Bradley, contacted me with information about additional financial improprieties she had discovered in their personal accounts. Her insights helped prosecutors build an even stronger case against her soon-to-be ex-husband. Diane Mitchell and Karen Fisher also reached out, first individually and then together, proposing to partner with Nexus on a foundation supporting women in technology. Their connections in philanthropic circles, combined with their first-hand understanding of corporate barriers to women's advancement, made them valuable allies. Even Elaine Calloway eventually came around. After initially defending Richard in the press, she had been confronted with evidence of his knowledge of the fraud. Our first meeting after the scandal was tense, but over time, we developed a cautiously respectful relationship. She had valuable insights into the tech industry's power dynamics from her years as a corporate wife, and once freed from Richard's influence, she proved to be remarkably astute. "I spent 20 years playing the perfect corporate wife," she told me during one of our lunches. "I suppressed my own intelligence and ambition to support Richard's career because that's what was expected. I won't make that mistake again." Professionally, I found myself thriving in my new public role. After years of operating from the shadows as J.R. Reynolds, I discovered that I enjoyed the challenges of visible leadership. The skills I had developed building SecurePath hadn't faded, and my financial background proved invaluable in rebuilding Nexus's systems and reputation. The company established mentor programs for employees, particularly targeting women and minorities who had been historically underrepresented in leadership. We revised hiring practices to reduce bias and implemented transparent salary structures to address pay inequity. Slowly but surely, Nexus was becoming the kind of company I had always believed it could be. My personal life, however, remained complicated. Martin and I had begun marriage counseling as promised, meeting weekly with Dr. Peterson, a therapist specializing in couples in business relationships. The sessions were often difficult, forcing us to confront years of accumulated secrets and assumptions. "You both created separate worlds," Dr. Peterson observed during one session. "Jessica, you compartmentalized your business identity to protect your personal relationship. Martin, you compartmentalized your work behavior to advance professionally. Neither of you allowed the other to see the whole picture." It was a painful but accurate assessment. The healing process was slow, with setbacks and breakthroughs coming unpredictably. Martin had indeed started his own consulting business, focusing on helping smaller tech companies implement innovative solutions. His deep knowledge of the industry, combined with his natural problem-solving abilities, quickly earned him a loyal client base. We had agreed from the start that his business would remain completely separate from my financial resources. This clear boundary proved healthy for both of us, allowing Martin to rebuild his professional identity and confidence. As Nexus stabilized under new leadership, I found myself at a crossroads, contemplating the future of both the company and my marriage. The lessons of the past months had been hard-won but valuable. Secrets and pretense, no matter how well-intentioned, ultimately caused more harm than good. Authentic leadership, both in business and personal relationships, required transparency and vulnerability. In a pivotal meeting with the board of directors, I made a decision that surprised even my closest advisors. Nexus needs a CEO who can focus entirely on its future, I announced. While I will remain as chairwoman, I believe we should conduct a proper search for a permanent chief executive, someone with the right experience and values to build on the progress we've made. The board members exchanged glances, clearly caught off guard. "Are you sure about this, Jessica?" Eleanor asked. "You've done remarkable work steering the company through this crisis." "I'm sure," I replied confidently. "My strength has always been in strategic vision and financial oversight, not day-to-day operations. Nexus deserves leadership that's 100% committed to its future." What I didn't say aloud was that I was also making space in my life to repair what mattered most. My marriage to Martin. The company had needed me fully during the crisis, but now it was time to rebalance my priorities. That evening, I shared my decision with Martin over dinner at home, our first home-cooked meal together in weeks. "I'm stepping back from operational leadership at Nexus," I told him. "I'll stay on as chairwoman, but we're bringing in a new CEO." He studied me carefully. "Is this because of us?" "Because you don't have to choose between your company and our marriage, Jessica. It's not a choice between them," I explained. "It's about finding the right balance. I want to be fully present in rebuilding our relationship, and Nexus needs leadership that isn't distracted by personal challenges." For the first time in months, Martin smiled genuinely. "That sounds like the Jessica I fell in love with. always solving problems with clear-eyed practicality. Is that a compliment? I asked, returning his smile tentatively. Definitely, he replied, reaching for my hand across the table. I've always admired your strategic mind. I just wish I had been worthy of your trust earlier. We both made mistakes, I acknowledged. But I think we're finally learning from them. As we cleared the dishes together, a notification came through on my phone. Janet Alvarez had been promoted to Vice President of Product Development, the first woman to hold an executive position at Nexus in the company's history. Good news? Martin asked, noticing my smile. Very good news, I confirmed, showing him the announcement. The transformation is really happening. Because of you, he said simply. Because of all of us, I corrected. One person can start a change, but it takes a community to sustain it. Looking around our kitchen, at the simple domestic scene we were creating, I felt hopeful about the future for the first time in months. Nexus was healing, becoming the company it always should have been, and slowly, cautiously, Martin and I were finding our way back to each other, building something more honest and equal than before. I've learned so much on this journey, from silent investor to public leader, from secret keeper to truth teller. If there's one lesson that stands out above all others, it's this. Our authentic selves, with all their complexities and contradictions, are always more powerful than any facade we create to please others. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and speaking your truth? Between maintaining appearances and living authentically? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Your stories of overcoming similar challenges might help others who are struggling to find their voice. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this resonated with you, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to stand up for what's right. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I truly appreciate your support through the ups and downs of my story. 6 months after the fateful executive dinner that had changed everything, Nexus Technologies hosted its annual company gathering. Unlike previous years, when these events had been exclusive affairs limited to executives and their spouses, this year's celebration included employees from all levels of the organization, held in the convention center downtown to accommodate everyone. The transformation of Nexus under its new leadership had exceeded even my most optimistic projections. The company culture had shifted dramatically, with employee satisfaction scores at an all-time high. Innovation thrived in the more inclusive environment. With the recent launch of our adaptive interface platform, ironically, the very technology I had mentioned at that disastrous dinner receiving industry acclaim and strong market adoption. As I prepared to give my address as chairwoman, I caught sight of Martin across the room, deep in conversation with Janet Alvarez, now firmly established in her VP role. He looked relaxed and engaged, so different from the tense, approval-seeking man he had been 6 months ago. His consulting business had taken off, with a growing client list of startups and mid-sized tech companies seeking his expertise. The freedom to work on his own terms had revitalized him professionally, and he approached each new challenge with the enthusiasm I remembered from our early days together. Our marriage had traveled a rocky road, but was finally on stable ground. The weekly counseling sessions with Dr. Peterson had evolved from crisis intervention to future planning. We had learned to communicate honestly about our fears and expectations, to recognize when old patterns threatened to resurface, and to give each other space to grow individually while still nurturing our connection. Taking the stage, I gazed out at the hundreds of faces looking back at me, employees old and new, board members, investors, and partners who had stood by us through the turmoil of transformation. A year ago, I began, Nexus Technologies was a different company. On paper, we were successful, profitable, growing, respected in the industry. But beneath the surface, we had lost our way. The values of innovation, integrity, and inclusion that should guide any technology company had been replaced by hierarchy, exclusion, and misconduct. The room was silent, everyone acutely aware of the journey we had taken together. Today, we stand as proof that a company can change its course. That toxic culture can be replaced with something healthier and more productive. That diversity of thought and background doesn't just make us more equitable, it makes us more innovative and successful. I shared key metrics from our transformation. The 40% increase in patents filed, the dramatic reduction in employee turnover, the record number of women and minorities in leadership roles, and the robust financial performance that had silenced our early critics. These achievements belong to all of you, I continued. To those who stayed through the difficult times, who believed that Nexus could be better. To those who joined us during this transformation, bringing fresh perspectives and energy. And to those who had the courage to speak up when it would have been easier to stay silent. I acknowledge Janet and the Women in Tech Alliance for their contributions, the Ethics Committee for their vigilant oversight, and the new executive team led by CEO Diana Chen, a respected industry veteran who had taken the reins 3 months ago. Transparency and integrity are not just corporate buzzwords at Nexus anymore, I said. They are the foundation of everything we do, from our financial reporting to our product development to our hiring practices. Looking toward the back of the room, I spotted some unexpected guests. Stephanie Thompson, Diane Mitchell, and Karen Fisher had arrived together. No longer defined by their husbands' titles, they had formed a formidable trio advocating for women in corporate environments. Their foundation had already helped dozens of women advance in tech careers. We've also learned that accountability matters, I continued. Those who broke laws and violated trust have faced appropriate consequences. Bradley Thompson had pleaded guilty to multiple fraud charges and was serving a 5-year prison sentence. Richard Calloway had avoided criminal charges, but faced civil penalties and the permanent stain on his professional reputation. Several other executives who had participated in the misconduct had been barred from leadership positions in publicly traded companies. But today isn't about dwelling on past mistakes. It's about celebrating how far we've come and looking toward the future we're building together. After the formal presentation, I mingled with employees and guests, many of whom shared stories of how the company's transformation had impacted their professional and personal lives. Teams that had once operated in silos now collaborated freely. Employees who had previously felt marginalized now led important initiatives. Later in the evening, I found myself face to face with Stephanie, Diane, and Karen, the former executive wives, who had been my unwitting allies on that pivotal night. Quite a different company gathering than the last one we attended together, Stephanie observed with a wry smile. Very different, I agreed. Thank you all for coming. Your foundation's work has been remarkable. We learned from the best, Karen said. Watching you take control of Nexus showed us what was possible. Speaking of which, Diane added, have you heard that Bradley has been trying to contact financial journalists from prison? Apparently, he's shopping a story about how he was framed by a vindictive woman. I couldn't help but laugh. Some people never learn, do they? Well, his credibility is shot, Stephanie assured me. No reputable outlet would touch his version of events. As they moved on to greet other guests, Martin appeared at my side, sliding his arm around my waist. How does it feel? He asked softly. Seeing everything you've accomplished? Surreal, I admitted. Sometimes I can't believe how much has changed in 6 months. Not just the company, he noted. Us too. He was right. The crisis that had nearly destroyed our marriage had ultimately forced us to build something stronger and more authentic. Martin was no longer trying to prove himself to toxic mentors or mold himself to fit a corporate ideal. I was no longer hiding behind the J.R. Reynolds persona or using my wealth as a shield against vulnerability. I have something to show you, Martin said, guiding me toward a quiet corner of the venue. He pulled out his phone and displayed an email from a major tech incubator. They're interested in my adaptive learning platform. If it goes well, I could secure seed funding by next quarter. Martin, that's amazing, I exclaimed, genuinely thrilled for him. His platform, designed to help neurodivergent children better engage with educational content, had been his passion project for months. I wanted you to be the first to know, he said, his eyes shining with excitement. And I wanted to thank you. Thank me? I haven't done anything. This is all you. You showed me what real leadership looks like, he said simply. Watching you these past months, your integrity, your vision, your willingness to make hard decisions, it inspired me to create something meaningful. not just profitable. Touched by his words, I leaned in to kiss him gently. I'm so proud of you. We've come a long way from that dinner party, haven't we? Light years, I agreed. As the evening wound down, Diana Chen joined us, champagne glass in hand. To Nexus 2, she toasted. And to the woman who made it possible. To all of us, I corrected, raising my own glass. Leadership is never about one person. Later that night, as Martin and I walked into our home together, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The secrets I had kept, thinking I was protecting our relationship, had nearly destroyed it. The corporate culture I had allowed to fester by remaining silent had almost ruined a company with enormous potential. Sometimes being underestimated, being dismissed as just another trophy wife with no business acumen could be the greatest advantage. It had allowed me to see people's true colors, to understand the depth of the problems at Nexus, and ultimately, to effect change more dramatically than might otherwise have been possible. But the real lesson wasn't about the power of surprise or the satisfaction of proving others wrong. It was about the strength that comes from authenticity, from aligning your public and private selves, from building relationships, personal and professional, based on mutual respect and honesty, rather than power dynamics and appearances. As Martin and I settled on our patio, looking out at the night sky, I felt a deep sense of peace. The company was thriving under Diana's capable leadership. Martin was pursuing his passion with renewed confidence. And we were finally equals in our relationship, sharing our true selves with each other. What are you thinking about? Martin asked, noticing my contemplative mood. How sometimes the hardest moments in our lives lead to the most important growth, I replied. If Bradley hadn't dismissed me so completely that night, I might never have revealed myself as J.R. Reynolds. We might have continued on as we were, me hiding my success, you trying to fit into a toxic culture. Remind me to send him a thank you card in prison, Martin joked, then grew serious. Do you have any regrets about how everything unfolded? I considered the question carefully. I regret not trusting you sooner with the truth about my success and wealth. I regret letting the situation at Nexus deteriorate so far before taking action. I turned to meet his gaze. But I don't regret standing up finally, even though it was messy and painful. Some battles are worth fighting, no matter the cost. Martin nodded, taking my hand in his. To authenticity, he said softly. In business and in love. To authenticity, I echoed, squeezing his hand and looking up at the stars. And to second chances. In the end, that's what my story had become. Not just a tale of corporate revenge, but a journey toward authenticity and the second chances that become possible when we have the courage to show the world and those we love who we truly are. Has your life ever changed because someone underestimated you or dismissed your abilities? I've shared my story of finding power in being underestimated, and I'd love to hear yours in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories about navigating complex relationships and workplace dynamics. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder of their own strength and worth. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Your support means everything as I continue to share these personal experiences. Until next time, remember that sometimes the people who dismiss you are actually giving you your greatest opportunity to shine. 333,333